Okay, so today we're going to talk about a topic in statistics involving categorical data. So when we're looking at categorical data, the big question we always ask is, what is it? Well, categorical data is basically something that is an identifier, something that is non-numeric that represents a kind of variable in the situation. So in this example, we're looking at the environmental club, and we're looking at people who are either not members or members of the environmental club by specified as being no or yes, and then whether or not they've ever used, rented, or owned a snowmobile. So the big overarching question here is, are these two values dependent? Meaning, does the evidence of one existing have any kind of impact on the other one existing? So how we answer this question is we have to build what's called a contingency table. So that's what you see over here. The contingency table is broken down into these columns and rows where you can kind of see the connection. So when we see a member, somebody who is not a member of the environmental club, who has never used a snowmobile, is in this little location right here, and so on and so forth. Before we can actually get into looking and analyzing what this data does, let's go ahead and see if we can make these totals by just simply adding up straight across the rows. So if we add straight down, we get to the bottom and we see that we're going to have a total here which is 1,221. Over here we're going to go straight down again and we're going to see we have 305. Over here on the side we're going to go across the rows, so this one is going to be 657. And this one is going to be 574. And then finally we're going to have 295. So these totals are important because they're going to be how we go ahead and create what's called the conditional distribution, or the percentages that make up the connection between these two variables. So this process requires that we take each individual element inside of the table and divide it by the row. So you can either go down by the column and go by the row. It'll give you the same general gist, but we want to see if there is a connection. So let's go ahead and let's do a bunch of division. So now we're going to take all of these things and we're going to put them into their own contingency table, and then we're going to analyze this distribution and answer the question, which is, are these things dependent or independent of each other? So I've transferred all those proportions that we had down on the bottom up into the contingency table up here so we can take a look at how these proportions work. So what we have is we can see from here, we want to look and see if there's any significant difference in these percentages. Now, if they're all kind of the same, then we can say that these variables aren't exactly connected to one another. Now, saying if something is the same is kind of tricky in statistics, and there is a test that we can actually use to test it. It's called the goodness of fit test, or the chi-squared goodness of fit test, depending on the textbook you look at. But we're not going to use it. It's a little bit outside of 2023. So in general, we can just kind of eyeball and see if we notice anything that's significant. So what I see here when I'm looking at this, just by kind of looking here, the obvious connection that one would go into this problem thinking is that you would think that somebody who's more environmentally friendly or a member of the environmental club would be a little more not into the idea of owning a snowmobile or even using one. And you can definitely look right over here in this second column and see that really big here. In the column where we look at the members that were of the environmental club and their proportions, we can see that 70% say they never used it, as opposed to the 36% of the people who are not members of the environmental club. And then as you can see that as we increase, as we go down from renting to finally owning, that percentage drops off dramatically, as opposed to the no column, where we see that while there is a shift, there's no trend here. There's no connection. It goes from 36% to 41% to 23%. It doesn't follow this very strict trend of 0.7 to 0.25 to 0.05, showing that there is definitely could be a connection between the environmental club and your membership to that, and whether or not you've rented, never used, or owned a snowmobile at any point. Of course, in statistics, a very important thing is that this kind of thing never shows causation. We never want to imply that being a member of the club is the cause of why you've never used a snowmobile. that would be inappropriate conclusion to make. But we can say that there is definitely a dependent connection or a dependent correlation between these two categorical variables.